There are two types of people in the world: those who dream of portraying incredible characters on screen, and those who achieve that dream but let it slip away because of something they've done. You'd actually be surprised how many famous celebrities fall into this latter category, especially considering how camera phones are now hiding behind every corner. But before we forget about them completely, who were the most popular celebrities who suddenly fell off the radar, and how on earth did it all happen? Before we get into the video, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything we post. Mel Gibson. Before the new millennium, Mel Gibson was, simply put, the quintessential action and drama star who ended up commanding per-movie salaries that are still to this day some of the biggest that would have ever been awarded to an actor. For playing the role of Martin Riggs in Lethal Weapon 4, for example, Gibson was able to take home over $20 million, which back in 1998 was an insane amount of money. He is also well known for his controversial and gruesome take on the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth by directing the critically acclaimed The Passion of the Christ. But then came the 2000s, which unfortunately brought the actor's reign to an end. In essence, it was a history of alcohol abuse that caught up to Gibson, which resulted in him being stopped at a routine DUI checkpoint, where a rant of his was recorded by the local police department. Driving under the influence is one thing, but it was the anti-Semitic and sexist remarks made by Gibson during this uncomfortable rant that truly caused fans to turn away from him. Nobody wants to support the career of a hateful person, after all. Fast forward 4 years later, and Mel Gibson's career was finally on the cusp of recovery. That is, until his ex-wife decided to release a voicemail recording that Gibson had left on her phone. Rather than getting into the allegations and comments Gibson made on the voicemail, we believe it's enough to say that the majority of it was made up of offensive and racist remarks, which were all aggressively aimed at his ex-wife. Following the release of the tape, Gibson was finally dropped by his talent agency, William Morris Endeavor, leaving his career almost dead in the water. And while it might be true that he was able to come back and direct the critically acclaimed drama Hacksaw Ridge in 2016, there's no doubt that nobody inside or outside of Hollywood would like to see the man appear on screen anytime soon. Charlie Sheen. Charlie Sheen, on the other hand, stayed away from drama on screen and preferred to dabble in the art of action movies and comedies. But when Tom Cruise took the mantle of action from him in one fell swoop, he decided to combine the two genres by starring in the Hot Shots franchise, which to this day remains one of the funniest movie franchise spoofs of all time. His career then petered out a bit, causing him to be relegated to minor roles until the release of 2.5 Men, which put Charlie in the lead once more as Charlie Harper. Behind the scenes, things were less than great for Charlie Sheen though. His unapologetic lifestyle of reckless partying and drug use over the years led to at least one serious overdose and multiple stays in rehabilitation centers all across the world. But surprisingly enough, it was his behavior as the lead of 2.5 Men that ultimately led to the destruction of his Hollywood career. Charlie Sheen then decided to bring this behind-the-scene life of his to the forefront of publicity by spouting some weird remarks during an interview where he described himself as having tiger blood and thus being unable to die. He also refused to apologize for being a terrible role model to his fans, admitting that partying is all he really cares about. After another stint in rehab, showrunner of 2.5 Men, Chuck Lorre, finally decided that enough was enough and fired Charlie on the spot. What followed from this dismissal was a meltdown of epic proportions where Sheen decided to aim some anti-Semitic remarks Chuck's way, causing his career to fall down in flames and finally peter out. Such a disappointment, as Charlie really was the lifeblood of the show. Lindsay Lohan. The next actress on our list hits home for all those 90s kids out there who grew up watching The Parent Trap, as this was our first introduction to the cutesy Lindsay Lohan, who at the age of only 11 years was cast to portray the roles of both Haley Parker and Annie James. She then went on to play Katie Heron in the cult classic Mean Girls and even took the lead in Herbie, Fully Loaded. Suffice it to say, Lohan was having an incredible few years and seemed to have avoided falling into the trap of becoming a failed child star. That is, until a cycle of drug use, arrests, and reckless partying derailed her career just 4 years after the release of her performance in Mean Girls. During this time, a few rumors started to float around about how difficult Lohan was to work with, which were confirmed 1 year later when studios actually started to talk about the situation with Entertainment Weekly. In the words of one anonymous studio head, "Right now, she'd have to pay a studio to get herself into a movie. Her films just don't open. She's a pain to work with. I think she's done." A full 10 years after the release of this article by Entertainment Weekly, and nothing seems to have changed as far as Lindsay Lohan is concerned. In fact, the Paul Schrader-directed thriller The Canyons was supposed to be a bit of a revival for the star back in 2013, but was shaded by next to every critic and viewer that saw it. Since this resulted in a number of articles titled, "Here's what happens when you cast Lindsay Lohan in your movie," it looks like Lohan is still suffering the fallback from her reckless ways. Paul Reubens. While you might not know the name Paul Reubens anymore, there's no doubt that you've heard of his childlike character Pee Wee Herman, as first introduced in the 1985 comedy Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Those who grew up with the character loved his reprisal in the children's show Pee-wee's Playhouse. Although, looking back at both properties now, we can't help but see what they were all along. Absolute nightmare fuel. How kids ever watched this, we'll never know. But regardless of what people thought of Pee-wee, there's no doubt that the character was firmly embedded in pop culture for quite some time until 1991 came along, which saw Paul Reubens arrested for masturbating in an adult theater. And while it was true that his morning show was done filming at the time, CBS made the decision to stop any and all reruns of the show, which led to a media storm over his association with children's programming. If there is any type of crime an actor of a children's show shouldn't have a hand in, it's something of a sexual nature, so Reubens should have known better. As a result of his conduct, Reubens avoided the public eye for most of the 90s, but then starred in a few shows from 1999 onwards. Surprisingly enough, it looked like his career was getting back on track, but then a pornography arrest in 2002 brought him down to earth again, threatening what he had built up to at that point. This charge was, however, then lessened. Nowadays, even after starring in the Netflix original Pee-wee's Big Holiday, nobody really knows who Paul Reubens is anymore, as everyone that loves Pee-wee was also around when all of this drama caught up to the actor. And it's a real pity, as he could have made a real impact if things hadn't turned out the way they did for him. Jennifer Grey. The Hollywood story of Jennifer Grey is one filled with glitz and glamour, with the star taking on roles in some of the most famous movies of all time, ranging from Red Dawn to Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And who could forget her portrayal of Frances "Baby" Houseman in the critically acclaimed Dirty Dancing, where she even picked up a Golden Globe nomination in the category of Best Performance by an Actress. But then Jennifer disappeared from celebrity status almost overnight because of something so ridiculous that you wouldn't even believe it. After getting a nose job, nothing was the same for the actress. In her own words, "I went in the operating room a celebrity and came out anonymous. It was like being in a witness protection program or being invisible." And while Grey continued to work consistently, the momentum she had gathered from her portrayals in the 80s seemed to disappear in a puff of smoke. She went on to talk about the dangers of plastic surgery and how people should be careful of what they decide to do with their bodies, citing her own experience as proof. Discussing the subject in an interview, she was recorded as saying, "It was the nose job from hell. I'll always be this once famous actress nobody recognizes because of a nose job. An unfortunate series of events, if we've ever seen one, and a definite cautionary tale to those who'd prefer to look a little different." David Hasselhoff. David Hasselhoff had an incredible career spanning across nearly 2 decades, being the 80s and 90s, and is most widely recognized for the part he played as Mitch Buchanan in the Baywatch franchise alongside Pamela Anderson. For a while, you couldn't turn on the television without seeing him, with fans everywhere crying out that you can't hassle the Hoff whenever something dramatic happened in their lives. It was a simpler time back then, with Hasselhoff even starting a successful singing career in Germany. But then everything changed when he got himself embroiled in a scandal back in 2006 when his daughter videotaped him in a drunken stupor eating food off of the floor. It wasn't just his marriage and family life that his alcohol and drug abuse cost the star, though, as it essentially caused his reputation in Hollywood to fall hard. Nowadays, David Hasselhoff can't land himself a role unless he's making fun of his own image, which can be witnessed in both the SpongeBob SquarePants movie and Piranha 3DD, where he cameos as himself. He also landed a small cameo in Dodgeball, a true underdog story, where he graced the screen for only a few seconds. His most recent starring, however, was in a British mockumentary series titled Off the Record, which you can imagine is nothing compared to his earlier fame and fortune. So what do you think of these famous celebrities who let everything slip away? Did we miss out on any of your favorites? Feel free to let us know in the comment section down below.